were you going to, oh, I was just going to ask you if you meant to record this.
Yes, I'm recording and I'm
And then I
finished.
saw the red button go on. Okay, well, let's get into it. And I'm known as the optimistic BA. And, I'll be truthful. Yes, it is a marketing ploy for my company, but it truly is how I try to embody life. And I think the branding has been successful because most of my friends at conferences now refer to me as the optimistic BA. So they don't usually use the word Judy anymore. So I think that is solidified. But try to be happy and carefree because it makes life easier. But the reason that we are here today, the number one priority in successful change projects. Now, change is one constant we have in life and business, never ending. Business change is more complicated and demanding than in the past. Have you ever noticed how people seem to be more impatient? I think that's the bad part of technology. And then I'm going to explain very briefly how change affects your comfort zone. Now, you need to get as many groups as possible to embrace your change as early in the project as you can, because they really become your best allies for the change. Now, the earlier you can do it, the better it is. But I realize that sometimes you need to see more details first. Now, in general, people are uncomfortable with change. But what you don't realize is that the comfort zone, whether it's your career or your life, is just a pit stop. It's not meant as a final destination. But I think some people kind of get stuck in that rut and they're just afraid to make a change. Well, you need to get comfortable with being uncomfortable, because if you're uncomfortable, that means you're learning, and you should be a lifelong learner. If you look at any of your really successful people, they are lifelong learners. If you notice, probably your CEO reads a lot. I think that people that read a lot are even better lifelong learners. But most of all, if you stop learning, then you may as well stop living. And that's the best advice that I can give you about that. Now, what is the number one priority in successful change projects? And I'm sure that people could maybe take a guess, but many factors play a part in change, whether it's customer demands, technological advances, and rivalries. There's also different company departments that might not be the main focus of the change, but they are connected somehow with the process. And of course, you have your employees. Sometimes you have external vendors, the stakeholders, consultants, and many more people. Well, what do you think is the number one priority? Well, it's the people. I may have gotten slightly carried away with the animation on this, so I hope you enjoy it. But now I'm going to go through. Oh, I thought I was going to sneeze. Excuse me. I'm now going to go through and explain how to achieve this and really try to help and explain how to help the affected people to not feel threatened and embrace the change. So now, one of the important parts of a project, especially a change project, is how does it affect me? And you really need to answer that question as early in the project as you can. Some people, they just hear the word change or transformation or whatever the buzzword is. I started with changes in my career in the 1980s, and I think I've been through a a change, however, whatever was the buzzword at the time, however they did it, whether you learned about it in big groups, small groups. You never wanted small groups because that usually meant there was a one-on-one with HR, and that never ended well. And then there was one time where they handed out envelopes. It's crazy. I hope companies are a little more prepared to do those things. And the earlier people know how they are affected, the smoother the adjustments are for everyone. Now, some people really need to know how the change affects them before being on board with the changes. And really, it's best to be as truthful as you can with every phase of the project. And as I said before, the more you get the affected people involved, the better things will be. The end users are usually the most affected. And really, they are a great source to tap for ideas of how to make things better. Now, many times, identifying new opportunities for the affected employees is one way to help them get to be a proponent for the changes. Now, being positive and proclaiming how significant the changes are is an excellent way to handle things. Now, as with any change, discussing new opportunities, if you know them, a lot of times you won't, but you're probably going to have a pretty good idea once the project starts. Try to discuss with them what's coming, and that may help them to ease some of their fears. Now, I've found that sometimes when you have a change that takes a while, sometimes we would have some reorg that somehow they managed to hide it from everyone, and you'd get called to a division meeting and that was it. But the ones that took a few months where you were building a new tool or whatever, what happens is a lot of good employees who wouldn't have even been affected left the company and went elsewhere because they were afraid that they were going to be left out. And as it turned out, they wouldn't have been affected at all. And they probably would have even gotten a better job out of the change. Now, some people just can't handle all that uncertainty around any changes. But one thing I learned through many years of changes, and I started in 1984 at the company, and I think went through the first major change in like 1987. So it didn't take long to happen. And the one thing that is pertinent about 1987 is that we didn't have computers, carpet, or cubicles. So life was a little different back then. We all had to talk to each other, basically. Now, a good thing to do is have experienced professionals available to talk to employees that get excited and are showing signs of stress, depression, or other mental issues related to the pending changes and uncertainty. I'm very fortunate that I never got too excited about much of anything. And most of my reorganizations were not even eventful. 700 people got to move one time, and I sat in the same row in the same desk. I was like, don't I at least get to move? Finally, I staked out an empty desk after it all happened because I just, I felt left out. Now, transparency is critical throughout the project. Now, it's probably just as critical in every day, but especially during a change project, because people are going to naturally be nervous. So it ties right into what's in it for me. And the sooner you can identify the opportunities and maybe even some of the training, that's important. And the other thing, the more you can involve the end users in your project, the better. they know more about their jobs than anyone else. Now, you will definitely get resistance from upper management, especially if they're in a production area. And, if the people can't at least help you test, then you need to insist on doing observations. I was not able to do observations on a couple projects, and things did not go the way that they wanted it to. Imagine that. Well, the next few times I really dug my feet in with the same managers, and it went much more successful because people could help. And managers and directors, they don't always know everything their people do. Now, production people I've found are very good at doing two things. They design shortcuts of how to do things. And on occasion, even though you have access to their database of procedures and processes, and you think you know what they're doing, and I supported the same area for basically about the last decade of my career. But one time I was sitting with someone and I was observing some things and asking questions. And then I asked a question, they go, "Oh, well, you don't have Pam's notes?" And I go, "No, I don't." And so one of these people had answered my question with this process. And so it's totally different than what was on their database. And that's what happens, especially if you have people who have been with the company in the same department for several decades in this case. But, transparency, it's a two-way process. Not only do you need to be transparent with them, they need to be transparent with you. Now, I speak about change because I worked on two, what I would consider very major strategic level change projects. And I'm not going to really sit here the rest of this presentation and talk through a bunch of slides. What I am going to do is, after I go through just a little bit here, when we get to the next slide, I'm going to stop sharing my slides, and I'm going to tell the story, not every detail. And then I want to make it a little bit interactive, and maybe you can put your picture on if you can. If you don't want to, that's fine. But maybe what you can do is then turn on your volume, your microphone, and that way we can have a conversation. And maybe some of you have been through change projects and have your own stories. I have allowed enough time at the end to address just general questions. And if you want to just put those in the chat box, that will be great. So my first strategic change project, it was a project to build a user interface for the life insurance administration system. Now, we use Scrum Agile, and our goal was to make the life issue process more user-friendly. The life insurance administration system was not, shall we say, the easiest thing to learn. It was written in COBOL. It was an off-the-shelf software that we bought from Canada, and then we just made spaghetti code out of it. And it is still in use to this day. So I was brought on this project for my product knowledge, and also I was an expert user for the life admin system. So with that, what happened and how did it end? So I'm going to go over just sorry, I didn't flip my slide. My apologies. And so I'm going to go over just a brief overview, and then I'm going to share some lessons learned, and maybe you have some experiences. If you don't, hopefully I have given you some good advice for a future change project. So, with that being said, this was a very large project. First few weeks, we had meetings, and we took a large amount of verbal abuse and complaints about the life system, and it was called Capsule. We ran several workshops and to elicit requirements. We had some idea of maybe in theory what we were going to do, but we had to do the proof of concept and everything else that went along with it. And of course, our first level were the different officer types. Many of them were new to the company, and they were just in their capsule bashing mode, and they really didn't know enough about the system or how things operated, but they just wanted it to go away, and they wanted their UI. And it's just not that simple, as you all probably could guess. And we needed to break our project into several phases because there were two different types of products that we issued, and there were several distribution channels. So we knew that we had a few years of work ahead of us. Now, we tried to keep a positive attitude as we talked and promoted the Life UI. We had an express type product that didn't have a lot of underwriting, and it was usually just one person who did the review of the application, made the underwriting decision, a lot of times that same day. And so then they dispositioned the file. Now, the other one was the fully underwritten products, and we knew that those had a lot more underwriting to them, basically because of the larger face amounts and different requirements for forms and things. But so we knew that took a little bit more effort. Now, the one thing that the people started to figure out was, especially with the fully underwritten products, there were like 3 different people who looked at it and performed different functions. And I think they figured out very quickly that those 3 positions were not going to exist when we were finished. Now, our kickoff meeting, interestingly enough, we tried to make it fun, and it was a construction theme. So there we were, dressed in these t-shirts and these hard hats, the construction hats, trying to have a bit of fun. And as I said, they knew multiple people touched the application, so they were on guard. And, they figured that the process needed to be streamlined, which was absolutely correct. Now, we started with the express products, and we worked on that area first. While they had different fields on some of the screens versus the fully underwritten products, there were commonalities, like everyone had client information. They had address and phone number fields and different information about the product. So a lot of it was the same. It was basically the screen where you dispositioned the policy that was going to be different for both types of products. Now, in addition to just doing that tool, we also were replacing their very outdated web workflow system, which was, I don't know what year it was installed, but it was very ancient. And it was where they picked up their work, and that was where they dispositioned the files. And so that system was slow enough that you could really go out and go down and get lunch from the cafeteria and come back, and it would still be operating. And I'm not exaggerating, but I was not happy when I found out how slow the cat version of it was for testing. But we used wireframes to simulate what our life UI would look like. And I really like balsamic, especially because at that time they let us have the license version, which meant that you could save your work. There's a free version, but as many changes as we had to do, that would not have worked. But you could kind of simulate it with a PDF that even though there was no code behind the scenes, it was really pretty realistic, and we could get feedback from them by doing that. Now, we did get people from the area, both the trainers and some end users who were on production, to assist us with the research. And we truly listened to their opinions on the changes. And as time went by, we actually let them participate in the demos and presentations to senior management and the division. And seeing a lot of those people step up and really mature and grow before our eyes, that was a really satisfying part of the project. Now, we had to initially, when we released the Life UI for the Express products, we had to add quite a few steps to their process. And we had to buffer the uproar when we explained that to them. I will never forget, I was the only one from our project team who was in the office on that day. And we were in this small conference room, and I had to give them the good news. I still say everybody kind of bagged me there by taking the day off, but eventually they grew to like it. And I'm not going to go through everything about this project. It took 2 years to do the Express products, and another 2 years for the fully underwritten products. And then we did the web workflow tool as we went along. The project was grueling. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Many of our stakeholders were not pleasant, but we held fast and we finished. It took 4 years, which was way over the time frame they thought it would take, but I don't know, looking back, that the estimates and the expectations were adequate. I don't think a lot of people other than product people really understood the capsule system, and that was what took a lot of the time. And we were over budget by quite a bit. I think it was a 6-figure amount of money. But I did learn a lot of things along the way. And this is what I really want to share with all of you. We celebrated each iteration. At the end of every iteration, we would go out somewhere. We were lucky enough that surrounding the company was a place. It was called Midtown, and so it had several restaurants, bars. It had a bunch of shops, different things, even services. You could go get a massage, you could go get your hair cut, etc. And I think maybe we frequented this one establishment maybe one too many times, because we walked in and the person could tell all of us what we were going to order. So I don't know about that, but it's important to celebrate the small gains, and keeping people first was the best thing we ever did. Now, thinking back, I don't remember. This was between 2013 and 2017. I truly don't remember if that was our main intent or that we ever discussed it, but we may have, accidentally reaped the benefits of it. Getting the trainers and the end users involved was the best thing we did. Now, many of those people have gotten promoted 3 or 4 times since the end of the project in 2017. And it's really gratifying to see that. Some of them have even rise to becoming directors. So that really tells you what a little bit of encouragement and letting you do something outside your comfort zone can do for your career. Now, the image that was on the last screen that I shared, it talked about failing, mistakes. Fail is just, that just stands for the first attempt at learning. Now, you will learn far more from your failures than any of your successes. And I've worked on several large projects, but you will never make the same mistake twice. And especially if it's an epic mistake, one that people are probably still talking about. But we asked for more time. We delivered late, and that was the right thing. Part of an impediment of ours was that we could work on developing a certain piece or a task. And we had several screens to develop. And so we went a screen at a time. And obviously you do the ones that are a little easier to do, or you're just bringing forward static information. But it normally isn't the right thing, or that it's a success that you deliver late. But the way the code was written, if we had something that was ready, but we weren't all ready to like issue the policy entirely, we could not deploy that code, even if we masked it in production, because it would immediately break the test systems. So it wasn't like we could do an iteration and then we put something in. We normally couldn't do that. So I think people were discouraged by that. And as underwriting put it, it's not really worth anything to me until it's all deployed. Well, yeah, I know. But in reality, the Life UI was a success. And IT has continued to enhance it many times since 2017. So really, it's far more than what any of us ever envisioned. Now, I don't know everyone's background who is on this session today, but what has been your experience with change projects? Or maybe you haven't worked on a change project. Just feel free to unmute yourself and talk.
I guess I'll start.
Thank you.
I've had experience with like change products similar to yours in terms of implementation, and maybe even also evaluating kind of the current, a change that requires some staff changes, and approaching the whole software development life cycle in a different way, and kind of having to interview and workshop with people to understand, where areas need to be improved, what areas need to kind of be added to the workflow to help make things successful. So, and I agree with what you said in terms of, or it's been my experience as well, that having the open communication, even having like those retrospectives and understanding what's working, what's not working, can help to, make for a better process, a better product, and a better working environment. Sometimes, I know this isn't like a typical change project, but also sometimes, I've also been involved in like efficiency, kind of like more on the business end kind of projects, just kind of coaching people towards maybe, different estimation practices, or, just which no one cares for that, but, different things like that, that have all been, around also managing people's, the way people respond to the change, and kind of, people being worried about, oh, well, my estimation is not going to be, it's not going to be correct. What if I overestimate? What if I underestimate? Well, does this mean I'm not being efficient, or, what if I'm wrong? Or, just, I think in any change, people have those different reactions, like you said, and that's been my experience, is just kind of listening and trying to trying to make everybody comfortable, but also kind of, not everything's going to be comfortable. So
Yeah,
just trying to
exactly.
balance that.
Exactly. As far as estimations, I've heard, and this is what I don't know who said it, but it is thought that estimates are just about worthless, but the practice of doing estimation is very valuable because there can be so many things. I mean, we ran into so many unforeseen impediments as we went along. It was just crazy sometimes. And the people did adjust. They really loved the Life UI when they gave it a chance. It really was kind of fortunate to see that, especially the Express people. After adding a few more steps to their process, they fully understood it once it happened. And once we got everything installed, then it was a little better. And so they did truly become our biggest proponents. And it was really gratifying. It was the first time that I had worked on a non-product project, because I had been on the Capsule team all those years. And so I was just a power user. And to me, Capsule made sense. But there was a lot of things that that was in Capsule that did not make sense. If you were looking at the accounting screen, your debits and your credits were actually reversed to standard accounting. And so that gave you a bit of a headache. But I can tell that Emily wants to talk.
I'm just laughing at your story.
Yeah, well, that's the point. It's a true story. I wish I was making it up.
Too bad it's true. Otherwise, it'd be funny. I find some people, everyone's different. I find some people, they'll go out of their way to avoid change.
Oh, yeah.
They'll just be absent, or they'll pretend they didn't hear. They'll pretend they didn't understand. So I find those people need extra attention.
Yes, they do. And we had to do that, and it's not the same thing, but I know that both of us have been involved in recent times with changes that affect our chapter leaders. And, it's a little different scale and a different perspective, but yeah, it really is all how you approach it. And I just can't imagine how boring life would be if I had just done the first job that I went to work at the insurance company. Now, I wasn't a job hopper. You have to be cautious about that too, especially if you're staying at the same company, which was very prevalent back when I first went to work there. You don't just want to apply for a job or something because you might get it and then you might find out, the grass isn't too green over here at all, So you have to be cautious. But yes, you're right. People just avoid change. And I just can't imagine trying to put the square peg in the round hole all day for 20, 30 years, because it really does broaden your horizons the more you can learn. And honestly, I learned things even the last few weeks I was at the company. And by that time, all I was doing was knowledge transfer. When I uttered the big R word, I mean, I never worked on another project the rest the last few months, but yeah. So what does everybody else think? Have you been involved in change projects? Are you just multitasking, maybe eating your lunch or working on something? Here we go.
I have had experience with this change management project. And one time we were doing, it was in waterfall methodology, and so we were collecting the requirements for a new claims process. And the old system, they had different payment hierarchy, and there were two systems. Like one would authorize it, and then the other one would be able to look upon and then I think release it or something like that. There were two
multi-step process,
steps, Yeah. And when the new system was to be built, it was structured in a way that you don't need two different systems anymore. It'll be one
Right.
system.
Okay.
But we were talking about roles, and you can give different roles and permissions. But getting that concept into the business was, when you put it out, it was first present to them in a workshop. And I could really see that how hostile they became. Like, they thought that they didn't get the concept of what is the roles and things like that, privileges and all that. And they were feeling that their work was at stake, and it was really very hostile environment, And then we had to wrap up the meeting, and then had a separate session to first say, what does the roles and what does privilege mean? And then regroup another session wherein everyone could sit together and talk about it, have a very constructive workshop session. So that from then I realized that how stakeholders, when you put things at them, they may not understand. And it's like if anyone mentions a change, the first thing our brain says, can we do it? It's not a comfort zone. You're going to move away from your comfort zone. It's like always it becomes a little bit scary, So always when a stakeholder, when I get requirements, I ensure that you touch all the stakeholders, let them know, like, what are we going to change? It might not be much relevant to them, but just to get the transparency, and people feel that they are comfortable. So even it might be like 6 months later, they might be touching the system, but they'll know, oh yeah, Asha did mention something 6 months back or something like that, That gives really a comfort feeling to the stakeholders.
Okay, thank you. Well, I think now I'm going to go back. I have another project I want to talk about. This one wasn't quite as extreme as the one I just talked about, but it had its own nuances. Okay, so can you see my slides?
Yes.
Okay, it's the screen that I was on when I went over and stopped sharing. Okay, so my second strategic change project was a little smaller, but we built a user interface for the life underwriting medical review phone call area. And this was unsupported, that the system they were using was unsupported software on unsupported hardware. And so it was huge technical debt. And we were going to use an outside vendor to build this UI, and that led itself to different nuances. Our mutual IT was really only involved in the initial build, and then it was really just dealing with an outside vendor. So here's like a little cute image, but those people didn't quite have laptops, so it was very interesting. So now what happened and how did it end? Well, and yes, I did use the same slide for both projects. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen as I go through my story. It's just a little easier to do it that way. And so this project wasn't quite as large, but it did support the call center that did the medical interviews, as I said. And this was for both life and some limited health insurance products. And the system that we had, as I said before, was so ancient. If it had a problem, it could not be fixed. So we were kind of under the deadline of you wanted to get it fixed before it blew up. And to just kind of equate how old this system was, the call reps could not copy and paste from another area on the same screen. They had to just retype everything. And we also, to actually get access to the system, we had to downgrade our Adobe from, I think they were on version 11 at that time, and we had to go down to like version 8. And that led to interesting discussions when you'd have another problem with your your computer, and some tech guy would come up to discuss, and then he'd go, why do you have Adobe 8? And, you know, you'd be like, don't touch that. Well, and the reason for that was when we started the project, our requirement documents, other than like an initial overview document, were really just the scripts for each group of products, because you were actually mimicking the actual application online. And that all seems simple until you go across all 50 states, and each of their laws are different. But we asked IT for a printout of the current scripts, but the system couldn't do that. It didn't have that logic in it. It was probably, those of you who might remember like the old DOS 1, 2, 3 system. It was very similar to that. It had a few things on it, but that was kind of what it reminded me of. And then you add on the fact the team themselves, they weren't used to working with project teams. And we were also not allowed to do observations. Now, we had a supervisor and specialist, but they didn't have a lot of exposures to projects either. And so we went through and we started to create our scripts. We each took a certain script, and we got done with the first script. And so we went through it and they signed off on it. And a few days later, I was kind of doing some reviewing, and I had a question about this one field. It didn't even apply to this product. So I was like, okay, why is it even on the screen? Well, in talking to the specialist, he goes, well, let me get back to you. And then they realized a few days later that they did not tell us that there had not been any changes made to the system for several years. So the questions that were on the scripts and were on the screen as they were talking to the customer, I mean, this was a customer facing call center, was not the right script. They would just print out applications and they kept them at their desk to use for calls. I can't even imagine. Some of the questions were difficult enough. And then to have, you got to, shuffle your paper, and then you record it in a field, but there might not be the same field because you might be looking at a script from a national, and there's actually a state special. It was just crazy. Now, what would we have found out if we observed them? We would have came across the fact that there were those papers that were out there. So we had to, rewind and rework. And it took a while, but we definitely figured out how to operate with that team. And the external vendor that was building the UI, when they want your business, you get off to a blazing start. And then pretty soon it's like, we were not a big player with their company. And so they kind of like put us on the shelf, so to speak. So we got started and we did get access to finally do observations. And then we got some scripts completed. But then our strategy was to deploy one script at a time, which really made sense because you didn't want to try to put everything out together. Well, the vendor then had a time frame where they got stopped for about 8 weeks. And at that point in time, we had nothing to do. And management knew we had nothing to do. And they did not approach the vendor. They did nothing about this. We did a large amount of professional development. We had a little bit of review work to do each morning. That took about an hour. And I was the most experienced BA, so I had some other knowledge that I could help a few project teams with little bits and pieces. Our project, it took 2 years, but the installation went well. We deployed a script at a time, and it really reduced the time spent by several FTEs. No one lost their job. In fact, I think they expanded the call center just a little, but it really helped to bring them into like the 21st century. And the the best thing was that they loved the copy paste. Can you imagine not being able to copy paste? I mean, honestly, really, as BAs, isn't that about all we do? You know, I mean, I know I do it a lot every day. Why have to retype? Now, what was interesting about this department is that the entire department, none of them were tech savvy. I mean, and they were working off of desktops, to be fair, at the time. And I was constantly going down to the area to troubleshoot. Luckily, we were just one floor above them and we could take some back steps. But the tool, when it was first built, it could only run on Firefox. And at this point, I can't even remember why. Well, one day I was helping one of them and I said, so what browser are you using? And they looked at me because I knew a lot of them were favored to Internet Explorer. I have no idea why. But this one person looked at me and she said, what is a browser? So that was what I was dealing with. I always tried to help to train people, additional people, to be as knowledgeable as I was about this tool, because we had a reorg and my entire team went to this project and I got to keep the tool and I had to go to another team. So as I said, I got out of it when I mentioned the R word and retired. And then I did knowledge transfer to about 5 or 6 people on my way out the door. So that really is my story. Does anybody have any comments about this one or any general questions?
That story sounds painful.
Yes.
All the constraints and setbacks.
Oh, yeah.
And it wasn't even about implementing the technology that was the hardest part, right?
No, not after we got the vendors settled down and really we had a good relationship. You know?
And being exposed to how how the call center people really did things.
Oh, yeah. And that's why observations, I can't stress that enough. But unfortunately, I hate to admit this, but that's the way a lot of my projects went. And so, you know, sometimes you just get used to operating that way. Right now, the company is in the middle of a 7-year technology project to get their technology up to date. There's so many Band-Aids and they let the business have their way for so many years that they were going to implode from the inside out. They announced it just right as I was leaving and I was like, oh my gosh, how happy am I that I'm walking out that door, because I just can't even imagine. I'm sure that in a year or so, they'll abandon it and move on to something else. But I'm not trashing my company. I had a great career, had met a lot of great people and had a lot of great managers, but it's just amazing how companies can operate. I think it has improved since we went to the SAFE methodology, but that even has its nuances. Questions or comments?
Yeah, probably a comment for me. It's Denis.
Mm-hmm.
So I've been working a lot with insurance companies,
Mm-hmm.
which are not the best to take over new systems, new applications, and a lot of legacy systems. But and the insurance world is kind of changing, kind of integrating the insurance with the finance world, investment and everything else.
Right.
So, but the overall view of everything, nobody has it. How data transfers. And I've been involved with one company which is trying to outsource the custodian, but all the administration also. And going through this, they chose somebody which was supposed to be, can't give you the details, but they are supposed to to help them. They didn't have a lot of experience within the insurance companies, especially funds which are specific to segregated funds. And what happened was there was a bit of it which was a process improvement. Okay, so insurance, instead of going through the leap of going through a system change to get it up to date, it outsource everything, thinking of everything will go right afterwards. But the data, nobody knows how the data was feeding before.
Right.
They wanted to change also the processors, lean way of people. So outsource everything. We are outsourcing, so most of the stuff we won't need it. But when they chose somebody, they didn't even do assessment first. So observation, as you are telling, how things are on the ground. So when you started, then they had to review everything, how their system were working, how the data flow was going, how the website was fed, something like that. So everything had to be reviewed. But when a vendor was already chosen, all this had to be done pre-selection.
Yeah.
To be able to know whatsoever the details. So it's the same a bit like you. So trying to do change, but not knowing in which environment you are working and not having done the observation and cutting corners. Another thing also, you speak of waterfall versus agile. So working in an agile environment, their backlog, when the finished project, is just wiped out instead of being transferred. So
right. I know.
Corners, things like that. And
yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's very true. And insurance companies are risk adverse to begin with.
Yeah.
Sometimes they'll use compliance as an excuse, but I think sometimes that's just an excuse because there's ways to still meet the compliance issues. Well, I guess we're almost at time. I've enjoyed this. I hope you have too. If you want to keep in touch, I have a slide in my slide deck, which I know I sent Randy a PDF to give to you, but you can, on LinkedIn, Facebook, all over the place. So just friend me or contact me and add me as a contact, and I, be happy to connect with you.